I'm my bones are healthy, my mind, I have a memory, or as best that it can be. If I fall over, I'm not going to fracture my hip, things like that. So that is really, really crucial and really, really important. So we need to have not just live longer, but we also need to live a good, better quality of life, you know, whether that's your bones, your bladder, your memory, your sleep, all of those really. And that's really, really vital, really, really vital. So we can enjoy these years to the best that we can, really. So that to me is something that's really, really important. I feel like I'm going on a bit, but there you go. That's me. I get over passionate on this subject. I'm going to bring in, if that's all right, our lovely, lovely Ola FAGBOHUN. Ola and I have known each other for many, many years, and I think anybody in Sheffield, Ola absolutely does not need an introduction. But because we've got friends from all over the world and all over the UK, I think it's probably best. Ola does so many things that I won't even pretend to attempt to introduce Ola, because I will no doubt miss out 60% of what she does. Ola, is it all right for you to introduce yourself?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, the lovely Pam. And actually, one of the things that when Pam and I first met, it was about the menopause.
Was it
I
really?
remember, yes, it was. I remember we were walking down the street and I was talking to somebody, Tanya, Chip Shape, and I'd just come from doing a menopause training session. And you met us in the road and we started talking, and then you started talking about your menopause experience, and we kind of bonded over that. So I love the way that life is so full circle. You know, from that incidental meeting, we're now here together, sharing our insights, our wisdom and learning from each other and others. So I'm really grateful to be here today, to be with you, with so many of others online. And also thank you, Cassandra, for inviting me to be part of today. So as Pam said, I, like many of you, wear many, many hats and have my hands in many, many, many pies. And I'm not going to go through everything I do, but one of the things, like Pam, going through the menopause opened up another opportunity to me to also run my own business and try some different things. So today, the hat I'm wearing is as a menopause coach and a menopause strategist. So what that basically means is that I look at how menopause can be better, well, basically how we, all of us who are in the space around menopause, and that is our healthcare providers, that is, you know, as Pastor Andrew mentioned, if you're in the spiritual space, that is if you are in coaching, if you're in fitness, all of us who do anything regarding our holistic total body health, how can we better support the many, many different people going through the menopause? Now, here's the thing, half the world, half the planet, the human world will go through menopause. How they go through it will be different, but at some point they will go through it. And it's really fascinating to me that with all that, the knowledge about women's health, and particularly the menopause, is seriously lacking all over the world. And this is something that drove me into this space, because as Pam said, you know, when I started going through the menopause, I basically had to do my own self-advocacy. I had to do my own research. And I'm one of those really mouthy people that doesn't like to stay quiet when I see injustice or inequality. So in 2018, I was living in Sheffield, and I was having a very, very bad night, many hot flushes and cold sweats, so I couldn't sleep. So it was early in the morning, and I happened to hear on radio, BBC Radio 5 Live, somebody talk about something called menopause cafes. Then this woman, her name is Rachel Wise, was talking about how in Scotland she had decided to have conversations with strangers, family, whoever, about the menopause. And my ears pricked up, and I thought, oh my gosh, this is amazing. So after the show, I called her up and I said, Rachel, I love the idea of talking about menopause. How can I get involved? And by that time, she'd only done 2 sessions. And she said to me, in Scotland, and she said to me, well, if you want to run one, go ahead. So in February 2019, I ran the second menopause cafe in England, the first in Sheffield. And it was very, very timely because at that time, BBC ran a show called Women's Hour. It's been running for nearly 30 years. And they came to Sheffield with BBC Radio Sheffield, and they spent 1 week in the city talking about the menopause. So I was contacted about running this event in Sheffield and asked to be on the radio. Now, what was really interesting is that I don't have a problem talking, but I did have a problem talking about menopause. And so when I was invited to be on this radio program, which is a national program, I initially refused. I refused because I didn't want anyone to know that I was menopausal. I didn't want anyone to know how old I was. You know, I'm young looking and I wanted to keep it that way. But then one really good friend of mine said, look, you're running this cafe. You yourself have been struggling. If you don't talk about it, who will? So I overcame my fear of stigma, being stereotyped and so on. And I was on the radio and I talked about why I was doing the Menopause Cafe and why I thought it was important. And that went live nationally. And then I ran the event, and then BBC Radio 5 Live said, can we come back and record it? So again, I was on national radio talking about menopause, at this time with other women. But what was also interesting from that period as well is that I became part of a panel of people talking about the menopause on another radio show. And I looked around the room and I noticed one thing. I was the only woman of any colour in that room. And I thought to myself, hold on a second, what is happening with non-white women going through the menopause? Where are their stories? Where are their voices? Where are their experiences? And I can't possibly be the only person to talk on behalf of all of that. And so that set something ticking in me, and I decided, you know what, I'm going to do some research on how women around the world go through this phase of life. And that led me to setting up my social enterprise called Zest of You, which focuses on providing culturally centered, holistic menopause and aging well support to people who have historically been excluded, overlooked, underrepresented, marginalized, minoritized, whatever term suits, within health and care, but also within the whole women's health space. And that's how I've come to you all today, really, to share what I've learned from the work that I've done and the people that I've met. But also, I'm also a researcher, so I'm very much evidence-based. So I'm also going to introduce into what I'm talking about some of the things I have learned from the small bits of research that are there. But the great news is, since about 2020, there has been an explosion of research that has been done on women. Now, interestingly, the latest edition of the British Menopause Society, and I'm a member of it, has got 2 fantastic articles on Muslim women living in the United Kingdom. And, you know, I am really, really pleased that there is more and more research that is exploring the diversity of experience of women across all genders, all sexualities, all faiths, all backgrounds. And I'm actually in the process, finally, of waiting for an application. I'm putting an application at University of Leeds to do research on this subject, looking at how we can create culturally centered menopause support to our diverse ethnic women living in the UK. So that's a little bit about me, and I will share my details later on. So I do have some slides, and I'm not sure whether they are available. So if they are, could we have the first one up, please?
The name you need, Ola, is Paul. You need to shout out to Paul.
Paul.
Yeah.
So Paul. hello, Paul. I am so grateful that you are helping us with this technical aspect of things. So if you have the slides up, please let me know. No? Oh.
Something's happening.
Fantastic. Okay, so Paul, if you could move on to the next slide, please. Okay, so I've told you a little bit about me. What I'm going to do in this sort of next 35 minutes is to talk about menopause and aging. And I'm putting the two together because menopause is a sign of aging. So we can't separate the two. Now, I am not a medical professional. I do not claim to know everything about the menopause. I have spent 1 year studying it, and I do have a qualification in aging women. But it took me a year to really understand what happens as we age, and menopause being a large part of it. And it's impossible for me to share all of that within the time that I have. So I'm going to share an overview in the time that we have together of the things that I have learned, and hopefully this will trigger into you that, you know, to do your own research, to do your own learning, and to share your experiences with others. Also, what I want to say is that I take a particular view of the menopause transition, and that is a very person-centered, very culturally centered approach to it. And I'm going to be honest and say that I'm often being challenged in spaces, because Pam is absolutely right. The most of the information that is out there around the menopause, whether that is academic research, whether that is medical research, whether that is celebrities or people talking about the menopause, particularly in the United Kingdom, it's mainly white women, and it's usually white middle-class healthy women who are talking about this. So I do work with white working class women, and they are not mentioned either. So the approach I take is about, we all are different, and our experiences of the menopause reflect that difference. There are some things we might experience, we may not experience in the same way, but you know, it's important to remember that we are quite different. The other thing is that I am a quite humorous person. I like fun, and I like to laugh, and I like to make fun of myself. So I will be bringing some humor into this presentation. It doesn't mean that I'm belittling or making anybody, you know, I don't want to make anybody feel that I'm not taking their experiences seriously, because I am. But I found, for me, taking a quite humorous approach to some of the things I was dealing with helped me get through. So please, you know, if I seem to be making light of something, it's not because I don't think it's serious or I don't think it's valid. You know, so I just want to let you know that. And finally, the key thing is that before I say finally, one thing I want to say is menopause is a holistic thing. It happens along with aging, from your hair right to your toenails. It also impacts your social life, your spiritual life, your emotional life. So this is a whole body approach, body, mind, and spirit. So I want you to remember that as we go through. And finally, please, 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 if there's anything that I say here that concerns you, or that you want to know more about, please speak to your GP or healthcare professional, or any other qualified person about the detail of any medical concerns. And I say this for people, particularly if you're living with long-term health conditions, because your experience of menopause might be slightly different than people who are not living with long-term health conditions. So there you go. So what I'm going to do over the next 30 minutes or so is to talk about the menopause transition. And I call it the menopause transition because as we get into this, you'll realize that the term menopause is a bit misleading. I'm also going to share in that, when we talk about the menopause, I'm going to talk about what it is, when it happens. I'm going to talk about some of the hormones that play a key role in this stage of life. I'm also going to talk about the impact it might have on our social relationships. And then I'm going to share some resources and some support. And then I will summarize and close before we lead on to questions. So thank you, Paul. If you move to the next slide, please. Okay, so I've already said a little bit about me, so I'm not going to go into it in great detail. But one of the things I do want to say to you is that the work I do, as I've mentioned, is situated in creativity, joy, and self-expression. And that is important to me because in order to get people to talk about something that they often don't talk about, Pam mentioned that oftentimes in many communities, we don't talk about our health as women. Sometimes it's stigmatized, sometimes we might feel shameful, sometimes we just whisper in corners about what we're going through. And so we may not have the words to talk about and express ourselves. So I used all different forms of creativity, using collage, using journal writing, using storytelling to enable people to share their experiences. And ultimately, I want people to feel empowered, emboldened, and have a sense of joy when they work with me. So it's really important that the work that I do is about honoring our lives. You know, our lives are rich, our lives are meaningful, and it's important that that is reflected in the work that I do. And everything I do is done with dignity and respect. So Paul, if you move on to the next slide, please. Okay. One thing I want you to think about before I start is this. I know you can read it there, but while you're reading it, I'm going to read it out because I think it's really important to mention this, that more than 90% of postmenopausal women didn't know anything about menopause before they were menopausal. And 60% only started looking for information once they started going through the menopause. Now, you've heard from Pam and you've heard from me, and both of us were exactly that. We didn't know anything about the menopause. If I'm honest, my thought about the menopause was that your period stopped and that was it. And basically you might feel a little bit hot, but you still look fabulous, because everything I ever saw about the menopause in the movies or TV, the women looked amazing. They didn't look stressed out. They almost looked like the same self, but just slightly hot. And then I was thinking, all this amazing money that I'm going to save from not buying period products anymore, I'm going to have an amazing life. But it was until I started going through the menopause and I started to have some symptoms like Pam, and I was thinking, what is going on? Am I having dementia early? Am I ill? Am I having a mental breakdown? And then I started to look into this. So Pam and I are not alone, and I'm sure here today that there are many of you who either started looking at the menopause once you started to feel the effects of it, or you are still quite unaware of what you are going through. Paul, the next slide, please. Okay, so as I said, many of us, before we entered the menopause, were clueless. And we didn't fully understand, and still don't, I think many people still don't understand, that menopause is actually a transitionary life stage, just like puberty. In fact, if you have a scale, you'd almost have puberty at one end and menopause at the other end. And some people actually say that menopause is like second puberty, but it's puberty in reverse. And the term menopause is very misleading because menopause itself is a single event, but the transition is not. And I'll explain that. So menopause transition basically has 4 stages. So the one that most of us, so you have what we call pre-menopause, and this is where it's your younger phase. So usually it's your kind of pre-40s, or or for some people pre-45. So you're still having regular periods. You are still more likely, if you are looking to be pregnant, trying to get pregnant, you will probably be thinking about pregnancy, and this is where you've moved from puberty into this, your most fertile stage of life. But for the menopause transition itself, there are 3 key phases. Perimenopause. Now, this is the term that is the most confusing for a lot of people, and it's actually a new term because the medical establishment needed a term to explain what happens before the menopause itself. So perimenopause can start up to 15 years before the menopause. Now, Pam mentioned that when she didn't realize in her 40s that she was going through perimenopause. And yes, for certain ethnicities, particularly if you're of Southeast Asian origin, you might be menopausal in your 40s. Now, when I say you might be menopausal, that means that your periods might stop in your 40s. The distinction between the perimenopause and the menopause is that in the perimenopause, you are still having periods. So people say to me, I can't be menopausal because I'm still having periods. Oh, yes, you are. You are just perimenopausal. So you could be age 40 and start to see that your periods become less regular. You'll still have them every month. They might be heavier. They might be lighter. They might be a bit longer. Or you might find that you skip a month. All of this is your body preparing for menopause. In this perimenopause phase, you will also, and when I say you, I'm talking about the majority of women, but not all women. I want to make this clear. And, it's not everybody who will deal with effects or changes or symptoms in perimenopause. But it's more than likely that your body will start to change in some ways. So you might start to see the good old brain fog that people talk about, losing, forgetting things, forgetting where you put things, you'll be imagining a word in your head, but you'll be struggling to say it. You might have the famous hot flushes or hot flashes. Americans call them flashes. Hot flushes. And people say to me, how do I know I'm having a hot flush? And that's a really good question, because if you live in a country that is hot most of the time, you probably don't realize you're having hot flushes. But hot flushes are different from just feeling hot. They tend to creep up your body. Somebody once said to me, it's like having ants crawling up my neck. Now, when I had hot flushes, and I had them really bad, in fact, I literally had hot flushes, it felt like every minute. What would happen would be my body would suddenly start feeling extremely hot, not warm, hot. And I would have a sensation creeping from my neck to my face. And all of a sudden, my face would be pouring sweat. It was not just a slight tingling or sweat, it would be drenched. I would be drenched and so uncomfortable. And they can last from seconds to up to a minute. And not surprisingly, the reason why this is the most researched and talked about symptom of menopause is because it is most uncomfortable, and it can really affect someone's life in terrible ways. So for me, because I was having them so badly, I was not sleeping well. I was very irritable. I was also feeling very ashamed that everybody could see me and could tell that I was going through this hot flush, and therefore they knew I was menopausal. The other side of having a hot flush is having cold sweats, and they usually go together. So oftentimes people will feel extremely hot, and then all of a sudden you'll feel very cold. And if you're anything like me, they would come absolutely together. So I would feel very hot for a minute and, you know, literally want to take off all my clothes. And then suddenly I am extremely cold and want to put them all back on. And this would go on in an hour. This could happen 6 or 7 times. And so not surprisingly, I found that quite challenging. Other symptoms that tend to happen during the perimenopause as well, and I'll come into some of them in more detail, is you could also have weight gain. And surprisingly, you know, a lot of people say to me, I woke up one morning and suddenly I had all this weight around my stomach. I've been fit, so I've taken care of myself. Why is this happening? And I will talk about that later. You know, people might have, I talked about irritability. If you're not sleeping well, it's more than likely you'll be irritable and you'll take it out on your friends and family and your work colleagues. I know I did. You will have, as I said, cognitive issues. We call them brain fog, where you feel you're struggling to remember things that you knew before, you can't remember. And this is really important for people who work, because it can make people feel that they're no longer good at their jobs. And unfortunately, there are about a third of women who that becomes a big issue and they actually leave their jobs. I'm sure there are lots and lots of other symptoms and so on. I mean, we will come on to this later, but the key thing I want you to remember about the perimenopause is it can start very slowly in your 40s or even in your late 30s, and it can last up to 15 years before you're actually in menopause. Now, menopause itself is one day. I mean, it's really strange to say this, but it is a single event. So the medical definition, and I'm going to paraphrase, is the day that you stop having periods, and for 12 months. So basically you haven't had a period consecutively for 12 months. And I stress consecutively. So what happened to me was I didn't have a period for 11 months. So I was thinking, okay, next month menopause has hit. On my 12th month, I had a period, a very long one that actually lasted for nearly a month. So when that happens, you start the clock again. You have to wait for another 12 months. So you have to go through 12 consecutive months without having one period. And then when that happens, you are officially in menopause. Now, the reason why it's very difficult for a lot of people to give you the date that they were in menopause is because most of us don't even remember when our periods stop for 12 months. Usually what happens is we remember a few days after, and 12 months plus 1 day, you're postmenopausal. Now, I've heard women say to me, I'm not yet at menopause because I'm still having hot flushes, or I'm still having cold sweats, or my heart is still is beating really quickly. So I'm still having the symptoms or the effects of perimenopause. Well, here's the sad news. I'm really sorry to share this with you. Those perimenopausal symptoms don't disappear in postmenopause. For many of us, they will continue, but they may be less. So you won't have them as strongly as you did in perimenopause because you're menopausal now. And this is where the issue comes in women's health, because they don't know how much of this is menopause and aging. So usually when you start to get into postmenopause, you're still feeling some of the effects of menopause itself, but you are also dealing with the fact that you are aging. So this is why you start to see issues like, for some women, they may have brittle bones and, you know, be more likely to have breakage of hips, of knees, of other joints. You might see that your hair's thinning, your skin is thinning, your nails are thinning. These are all things that start to happen in perimenopause, but I guess are most noticeable in postmenopause. And I'm going to come on to that later on. So basically, what I want you to remember is this is not a single event stage. It is a number of different stages that our bodies go through. And that's why it's often called the transition. So as Pam mentioned, the average age, according to the British Menopause Society and the World Menopause Society, most women will experience the menopause, the 12 months without a period, between the ages of 51 and 54. It was 51. The British Menopause Society are now saying it could be up to 54. I know somebody who was still perimenopausal at 58. This is an average, and this is why it's usually. And as Pam said, there are different ethnicities that experience this menopause, that is the cessation of periods for 12 months at early ages. And women of Southeast Asian heritage tend to be in menopause younger. And that is, they will stop having periods often before 50. There is also research that Black women, particularly Black women in the West, also tend to experience menopause before the age of 51. They may experience 50. So again, as I mentioned, there's very little research that's been done on this, but one of the things, particularly with Black women, that has come up is the effects of racism. And we already know that racism does have an effect on our overall health and well-being. That might also, there's also research that says this might also be why Black women in particular in the West experience hot flushes or flashes more than other women. But again, there needs to be more research that's done into why it is that women around the world experience menopause in different ways. There is often people say to me, well, my mother went through menopause early. Will I go through menopause early? Well, unless you're living the exact life of your mother, who knows? The role of genetics is important. There's research looking at whether having children and not having children will affect your when you go through menopause. The environment that you live in, and also if you have health conditions. And this also brings me into menopause can often also happen earlier due to other reasons. So if you have fibroids, it's more than likely at some point that you might have been offered a hysterectomy. Now, if you have a hysterectomy, that is your womb and your ovaries have been removed, you are likely to go into full menopause. If your ovaries, for some reason that you've maybe ovarian cancer or ovarian cysts and your ovaries have been removed, you will start going into menopause. So for some women, they will go to menopause early because of surgical reasons. For some women, it will be medical reasons. So women who have breast cancer or some of the other reproductive cancers might go into menopause early because of the medication they're taking. Women who are dealing with things like polycystic ovarian syndrome, endometriosis, might be on medication that one may also send them into early menopause. So there are many reasons why women under the age of 40 might be going through menopause. One of the things to consider, and I'll talk about this briefly, is if you are going through menopause before the age of 45, they consider it to be early menopause. And if you are on going through early menopause, it's more than likely that your provider will offer you menopause replacement, menopause hormone therapy that used to be called hormone replacement therapy. Now, the reason why they tend to offer it to younger women is because your body has, and I'm going to use this word advisory, unnaturally gone through menopause. So it's been forced into menopause before its due time. And in order to make sure that your body doesn't deal with a loss of things like calcium, vitamin D, and estrogen particularly, they give you some hormone therapy to support you until you get to your 50s, when your body should typically go through menopause. So, you know, this is a really quick, rough overview of what menopause is and how it happens and when it happens. But again, I want to really emphasize that each experience is unique, and one size does not fit all. And by that, I mean that every woman's experience is different, and you can't really compare yourself to someone else. So if somebody else is struggling, it doesn't mean that you will. Because your mother struggled doesn't mean that you will. Or because your sister didn't struggle doesn't mean that you won't. And I say this because my sister is 5 years younger than me. And when I was in the late stage of my perimenopause, I had a lot of challenges. And I'm going to come on to symptoms and changes later. And she saw me struggling with hot flushes and cold sweats, and she became quite afraid. And she said to me, I really don't want to go through this menopause. It seems really, you know, really difficult. You are really struggling. And then she hit 50, and then she hit 51, and she's 52. And she said to me, when is this menopause happening? Because I don't see anything. And I said to her, when was your last period? And she said, oh, I don't know, but I haven't had one for a year. And I said, well, you've had menopause. And she said to me, how come I didn't have any changes or symptoms and you did? And, you know, and this really hit home to me, just how different we all are. Paul, if you move to the next slide, please. So I want to talk a little bit about hormones, because oftentimes when we talk about menopause, we tie it to our reproductive hormones. And the hormone that is mentioned the most often is estrogen. And so women have more estrogen than men, and men have more testosterone than women. And I say more because men do have little bits of estrogen and we have little bits of testosterone. So there are two types of estrogen. Now, I'm not a scientist, so I'm not going to go into the absolute detail, but the reason why I want to split them up is because the amount of them changes when we start to prepare for menopause and after menopause. So in the premenopause stage and the perimenopause stage, we have what is called estrogen 1 or estradiol. And that is the estrogen that supports our heart, our liver, our essential organs. It is what helps us prepare for our periods. It is the hormone that really kind of gives us our womanly shape, and so on. But during the perimenopause and the menopause, it starts to decline. And as it declines, we get more estrone, which is E2. And this is the one that actually doesn't have the protective factors as estradiol. And because it increases, that's when we start to see the weight gain, and particularly around our stomachs. And that fat that starts to develop around our stomachs is the fat that we really need to be worried about, because it attaches itself to the vital organs that in the past, the estradiol would have made sure were protected and didn't have a lot of fat. So this is why the biggest killer of women in postmenopause is heart issues. And that's because estrogen protects our hearts. And as we go through perimenopause and postmenopause, the estrogen that protects our heart declines. And if we're not doing things to take care of ourselves, such as good nutrition, moving well, good sleep, and other things, then we are at very high risk of cardiovascular disease, such as high blood pressure.
Where is that transport?
Oh, sorry, yeah, such as high blood pressure and so on. So definitely, if you've got a concern about that, please do speak to your healthcare provider. As well as estrogen, there are other hormones such as I can never say this, progesterone. And progesterone is our calming hormone. It helps us to sleep and it gives us balance in our lives. And oftentimes, when that starts to decline, we will find that we have problems sleeping. And oftentimes people say to me, oh, I keep waking up at 2:30 or 3:30 in the morning and I can't go back to sleep. This again is because our hormones are a little bit all over the place, and our progesterone as well might not be giving us that calming effect to enable us to sleep. Usually when it comes to hormone replacement therapy, these are the two main hormones that are, if you like, replaced or enhanced in order to give us a little bit more balance and to also support our body so that we can get some of that protective effects that have been missing as we go through menopause. A little bit of testosterone, and I mention this because a lot of people talk about, oh, I'm getting more hairy in my chin, and my sex life isn't so great. And for some people, they might see an increase in testosterone. The debate is still out on the role of testosterone in menopause, and there's more research being done looking into it. But it can affect our energy and it can affect our sex drive. And then there's cortisol. Cortisol, our stress hormone, can increase as we're going through this menopause transition. And that's mainly because many of us are already stressed as when we enter into menopause. We are caring for children, caring for parents, caring for family members, working, doing so many things. And so we bring a lot of stress into this stage of life. And then when our bodies are now doing things that we don't understand or we don't feel we have control over, that increases stress. So you might see that you might find that your body's flooded with more of the stress hormone as well. And as I mentioned, all of these hormones affect our body, our mind, and our emotions, including our mental health as well. So if you are experiencing anxiety and depression prior to the menopause transition, you might find that you're not as balanced as you were before, and you might need some additional help. It doesn't necessarily mean that you will be anxious, but anxiety can be one of the issues that does come through, and I'm going to talk about that. But finally, it's important to say that you're not failing as a person or as a woman when you're going through menopause or you're struggling to deal with these things. It is just like puberty. Your hormones are rebalancing and preparing you for getting older. So your body's adjusting, your mind is adjusting, your emotions are adjusting. You are not failing. Paul, if you can move on, please. So you will hear that there's always somebody who says there are 50 symptoms, there are 4 symptoms, there are 1,000 symptoms, there are 100 symptoms. There will always be more and more of these symptoms and changes that you will hear. And this is because, as I mentioned earlier, our understanding of women's health across the entire lifespan is lacking. We're learning more and more, but we still have a long way to go. And so each time the research is done, they find more and more of these symptoms and changes that happen as we age. But it's really important here to say that, you know, according to recent research by the British Menopause Society, 1 in 4 women experience symptoms so severe that they feel that they have to leave work or that they need medical intervention. And, you know, people will know what that means and how that feels. To give you an example, when I was perimenopausal, the biggest issue that I had before the hot flushes was anxiety. I'm not an anxious person. I didn't have a lot of anxiety, but as I was going through perimenopause, I was so anxious. For some strange reason, I kept thinking I was going to be arrested and go to jail. I don't know what that says about my subconsciousness, but I just kept feeling that any minute around the corner, somebody was going to take me away. I had no understanding why I felt like that. Now I look back, I realize it was as my body was preparing, I started to get anxious. But in the last year of my perimenopause, my hot flushes and cold sweats, my lack of sleep, my anxiety, my irritability increased, including my weight gain. And it got so bad that I did leave work. I took 3 months off. I was privileged enough to be able to take some time off. I took 3 months off to take care of myself. That's how bad it can get. And I decided that at the time there wasn't great news about hormone replacement therapy, so I didn't want to take it. I also felt that as a woman, I should be strong enough to deal with this thing on my own. However, in the last 12 months, I was not managing. I was struggling, and I went to my GP and I said to her, I don't care what this hormone replacement therapy is or does, just give it to me. I cannot live like this. Now, I didn't get it because at the time, they didn't give it to people with high blood pressure. I know that has changed slightly. So I got another medication to try and deal with the hot flushes. So all I want to say to you is this, is that not everybody will go through symptoms and changes so severe that they will feel that they need medical intervention. You are also not lucky if you don't have any severe symptoms and changes. We need to change the narrative and the story about what we say about this stage of life. And as I mentioned, these symptoms and changes can affect every part of your body. We've mentioned some. I didn't mention aching joints. Oftentimes people complain about their joints aching. You know, people have said to me that they've noticed that they've got bladder issues, that they realize they go to the toilet more often, or they can't hold their wee as much as they used to. Also at this stage, because our vagina is dry, estrogen is the lubricant that keeps our vagina moist. Because it dries, we also lose collagen. It means that our vaginas become drier, which means that we're more likely to have infections, uterine, I've forgotten what the UTI infections, I've forgotten what it stands for. I'm sure somebody can explain that, but we tend to have vagina infections in that area much more. So, you know, as I said, symptoms differ for everyone. Every age, every experience is different and is valid. You know, just because somebody doesn't have hot flushes doesn't mean they're not menopausal, doesn't mean that their experience isn't real. And as I said before, if you are dealing with any changes or symptoms that cause you great discomfort or even mild discomfort that you do not want to live with, please speak to your healthcare professional and ask them about any remedies they can give you. And yes, they will talk about hormone replacement therapy. The research into hormone replacement therapy has improved greatly. There are different types, and they will work with you to find a solution, a treatment that works for you. Each hormone replacement therapy is different. Thank you. Urinary tract infection. Thank you, Pam. Each is different. So, and it will take a while for your body to adjust to it. So don't expect miracles, but there is help out there. So please make sure that you do seek help. Paul, please move to the next slide. Okay. The other thing I want to say is that, and I'm not ignoring the questions and statements that are in the chat, but we're going to come to them when I finish. The changes and symptoms don't all happen at once. I mentioned to you that in the beginning of my perimenopause, all I had was anxiety. In the last 12 months of my perimenopause, it was like every single one of these 100+ symptoms all decided to visit me at one time. It was almost like, well, you know what, we're just going to show you what this stage can be about. So over time, they may happen. And as I mentioned, they may still continue into postmenopause. So they may overlap with how we age. And again, and I say this and I repeat this, not everyone will have severe symptoms. But I'm also not downplaying, even if you have one that is difficult, you know, it's not great. So always, please don't suffer in silence. You don't have to. There's so much more knowledge. There's so much more openness. And if your GP or your healthcare provider isn't taking you seriously, find someone who can. Paul, the next slide, please. Okay, so how do we manage? The first thing I'm going to say to you is this: please be kind to yourself. You know, one of the things that we don't do, you know, particularly as women, we don't take care of ourselves. We take care of everybody else in our lives, but we don't take care of ourselves. And then when menopause and perimenopause hits us, we are dealing with this upheaval in our lives, in our bodies, in our spirits, in our emotions, in our mental health. And we're still not kind to ourselves. We still say to ourselves, I need to power through. You know, we see someone struggling and we say, oh, well, I had a great menopause. I don't know what's happening with you. You know, this is a major life change. In many cultures around the world, they celebrate. The Japanese celebrate when people go through this. They acknowledge that you're moving into a new phase of life. So please be kind to yourself. And then find the option that works for you. For some people, it will be medical, hormone replacement therapy, or other types of medication. For others, it will be lifestyle changes. And now this is nothing new. We've heard this our entire life. Moving more is great for our entire system. Eating well, eating good, nutritious food. And it's really important as we get older, just like we do when we're very, very, very young. We need all the key vitamins, the key minerals. We need, you know, we need to put those vegetables back in, you know, particularly living in the West, which is very challenging to put really good vegetables and fruits into your diets. We need to put them back. Or, you know, if you are going to use supplements such as multivitamins and so on, make sure that they are good multivitamins, and also make sure you speak to your healthcare provider to make sure you're not taking something you don't actually need. There's a lot of information on social media, on websites where they say, you know, take lots of collagen, take lots of probiotics, take lots of X, take lots of Y. The research into it is still not great. And also a lot of the minerals and vitamins, some of them, if you take them together, it's either pointless or you're actually causing problems for yourself. And then if you're also taking medication, you need to be really mindful. So honestly, please do yourself a favor and talk to your healthcare professional. Also, you know, cultural identity is really important as we age. And many times people I've met who have cultural ties to countries in Africa, in the Caribbean, in South America, in Asia, say to me, oh, but you know, we use traditional medicine and that has worked for us our entire time, so why should this be any different? And again, there's very little research that's done on traditional medicines that have been around for centuries in other countries. So, you know, it's very difficult to say how those questions, how those traditional types of management will affect your menopause. But again, you know, you can do your own research, and you can speak to your healthcare provider and see what works for you. Some people talk about herbs that work for them, herbal teas and so on. There's still little research, but if you feel it makes you feel happy and it makes you feel content and balanced, go with it, as long as it's not making you feel ill. And this is why, you know, it's essential that you do something that improves your emotional health. Also, many people say this time of life makes them feel more spiritual, makes them feel more grounded, makes them feel that, you know, they want to do more, have more legacy, have more purpose in life. Some people feel it makes them closer to their faith, because they feel closer to, I guess, you know, for some people they feel closer to death, and they want to better understand what life is, what what life after death might be. So there are many ways of which you can bring it. Some people meditate, some people do yoga, some people pray. You know, find your way of managing, and some people use a combination of all of them. But whatever method you use to manage this stage of life, where necessary, do not struggle, do not be silenced or live in silence, and be skeptical if somebody is trying to sell you something on social media and so on. Do your own research, get medical support, and that includes your pharmacists. Pharmacists are amazing. If you have some concerns about herbs or a supplement, go and talk to your pharmacist. They will give you some amazing advice if you can't get in to see your GP, because not all GPs are clued up on the menopause. It's not mandatory that they are trained on the menopause. And also, don't forget social support. Social support is great for your emotional and spiritual and social health as well. Sitting in silence or suffering in silence is unnecessary. There's so much support that's out there. So find what works for you. There is no one right way. Okay, move on, Paul. We're nearly there. Okay, I want to talk about something that we don't often talk about, and that's about our relationships, our intimate relationships. So, you know, many of us come from cultures where, particularly as women, we don't talk about our intimate parts of our body. We don't talk about our reproductive system, and we definitely don't talk about our sexual health, activity, and things like intimacy. But at this stage of life, many people say that menopause can affect their relationships, particularly their sexual relationships. And that's often because for many, as estrogen starts to decline, their vaginas get drier, get less elastic. I've heard people say that my vagina itself and the clitoris has disappeared. You know, I don't feel like a woman anymore. Then there's issues around weight gain. People, you know, women are saying, I don't like the way I look, I don't feel attractive, or that they're not sleeping really well for whatever reason, and they don't want to be bothered by their partners. And this has an effect on not just the sexual act, but also the intimacy that you have in your relationship. And if you're not talking about these changes, it can lead to misunderstandings. Oftentimes, the increase or decrease in testosterone, depending on who you are, can lead to libido changes. Your sex drive will change. And some people say, I feel more sexual than I have before. Some people say less. But if you are struggling, particularly with if your vulva area becomes dry and you find the sexual act quite painful, you can speak to your GP. There are some amazing lubricants out there that can help you with that. It is not something to suffer in silence. So it's important that you understand your intimate parts, understand the changes, and where you see something that gives you concern, please do speak to your healthcare professional. A question that gets asked a lot is, can I still get pregnant if I'm menopausal? Now, the reason why it's important that you understand the different stages of the menopause transition is because you can get pregnant in perimenopause. And because remember, you're still having periods, they just may not be that frequent. And I remember, you know, I'm of Nigerian heritage, and one of my aunts used to say that there's all these handbag babies, that all these older women are going to all these parties with these little children, and these women have got to be past 40. Yeah, all those surprise babies that suddenly show up, you know, in the 50s or so on, is because people thought, oh, I'm not having periods anymore, I can come off contraception, or I don't need to be careful, and voila, that late pregnancy turns up. So it has been suggested that when you realize that you are postmenopausal, it might be wise to just continue taking precautions for it can be up to 12 months, just to be on the safe side. But once the menopause has been confirmed, and you definitely know that it's 12 months plus, then you can come off medication, and the chances of you getting pregnant are probably very, very slim. But be mindful in perimenopause, yeah, pregnancy's there. But finally, in this stage, I want to be really clear. While we are not used to talking about sexual activity and what we want and our intimacy with our partners, it's important that you start to have those conversations. I have spoken to many, many men who have said to me that they didn't know that their partners were struggling. And if they'd known, maybe they would have been kinder, maybe they would have been more thoughtful, maybe they would have moved towards intimacy and less about the sexual activity. The other thing to say is, women, look, you know, we've reached an age where if you don't know what you want in the bedroom, you kind of need to start asking for it or start finding out. This is your time where you can ask for what you need, you know. So work with your partners, your family, your friends, you know, talk to people about what you're going through. Not necessarily everybody about this, you know, the issue about, you know, having a dry vagina or a vagina that causes you a problem. But if you are having challenges going through this stage of life, the more you educate your partners, your children, your family, your friends, your social circles, the people at work, the better it will be for you, because it's shown that the more knowledgeable people are, the more supportive they are to you as well. Next slide, Paul. So I appreciate that I have done a whistle-stop tour of this amazing life experience. And by all means, I haven't covered, you know, there are lots of things I've left out and things I haven't covered in detail. So because of that, I want to share with you some really great resources and support that's out there. So the websites are accessible regardless of whether you're in the United Kingdom or not. So there's something called the Women's Health Concern. Women's Health Concern is part of the British Menopause Society, which is part of the World Menopause Society. And it's the patient-facing arm of the British Menopause Society, with some amazing resources, including resources in other languages. So there's resources in French, in Gujarati, in Arabic, and so on. I also want to introduce you to a website called Educate Yourself. Educate Yourself was a menopause campaign done 2024 to raise awareness of menopause and to raise awareness of the different ways that menopause can affect us. It's a fun, lively campaign featuring women from all backgrounds, including non-gendered identifying people as well. And it's just a bit of fun to make the information accessible. I'm also going to say, full disclosure, that I am the leading person featured on it on the homepage. So I took part in it as well. There's an amazing website called Black Health and Beyond, which is looking at menopause and women's health from a Black woman's perspective. And then there's a really great resource called the Women of Wellbeing, and this looks at women's health, women and the health of women and girls, and it has some wonderfully informative and engaging webinars, and it works with some wonderful doctors from different backgrounds to make this information so accessible and inclusive for everyone. There are amazingly so many books now about menopause. In 2018-19, when I was perimenopausal, there were hardly any. But I want to draw your attention to a couple. We are still not having as many books written by women and those going through menopause from across the globe. So there are books written by African Americans. There are books written by people from in the West. We need more books written by women from across the world. So Black and Menopausal is one of the first books written in the UK, featuring stories from Black women across the United Kingdom, from different cultural heritage, and it's a fantastic book, and it has an accompanying website. Still Hot is a book featuring 42 stories from women from all ethnicities about their experiences of menopause. And I want to reference The Knowledge. So The Knowledge is a book by Dr. Nigat Ahmed. And this book is amazing because it's a book that looks at women's health from girls to post-menopause. And it's written by a Muslim woman of Pakistani heritage. And she has got some great images in it. So it's a book that she wrote for her boys, actually, but it is useful for everybody. If we talk about our lack of knowledge about our own health, even as women, this is the book to get. There are also podcasts and webinars. So one of the most popular is Menopause While Black by Karen Arthur. A wonderful woman who raised the subject of the lack of inclusivity and of menopause. She has a website and a podcast, and there's so many other podcasts now by women of all ethnicities and backgrounds on menopause. And again, I mentioned the Women of Wellbeing webinars. Women at work, I didn't touch so much on women at work, but I do want to say, if you are working, ask your employer about how they're supporting menopausal people at work. Many in the West, particularly here in the UK, have a charter to say that they're menopause friendly. They will also have menopause ambassadors within their organizations and probably run menopause cafes and menopause support groups. So ask your employer. If they're not doing it, ask them why. And if you are anything like me or Pam, get something started. Also, particularly here in Sheffield, many local community organisations have many different support options: menopause cafes, menopause groups, women's groups, and so on. There is, what I'm saying here is, while this list is not exhaustive, please search, ask, learn, and share. Find what works for you. Now, before I go, and before I hand over, I want to leave you with something. So I hope you get from this, and from me, and from Pam, that menopause is not an ending, that it's your opportunity to find a powerful new beginning. While our societies might make menopause seem like something that we have to hide or quietly suffer, we know that story is incomplete. So menopause is your invitation to step forward with confidence into your next chapter of life. If we are privileged to be alive to deal with menopause, as Pam mentioned, our forefathers, our foremothers didn't. So what are we going to do with the next 20, 30, you know, maybe even 40 years of our life? So it's a moment to put yourself first. And I'm saying this unashamedly. Put yourself first. Do not apologize. Do not compromise. You've done your job. This is your time now. This is a stage to open new doors, to renew ambition, and to rediscover the joy and the pleasure of life. Because thriving when you age well is not about fading quietly into the background. You are not invisible or invaluable. Aging well means living boldly and honestly. So I'm going to leave you today with this question. And I'm not asking you to answer it today, but I want you to think about this. How can you make menopause your moment of opportunity, your time to define your own needs and desires clearly, confidently, and most of all, on your own terms? Paul, the next slide, please. So finally, that's me. And you can see me on the Educate Yourself website. Those are my contact details. I also want to say that as part of this, because I know I've whistle-stopped through it, no matter where you are in the world, if you're listening to this and you feel that I have said something that resonates, or even if you want to challenge me, because I love challenge, please get in touch. And also, if you find yourself struggling or feeling a little bit out of control, or you want to learn more, I am offering 5 30-minute coaching sessions that can take place in the next 6 months. They can take place online or in person if you're in Sheffield. They will be 30-minute sessions where we can start to have these conversations around what menopause means to you. And if you want to continue with the coaching, that's fine. If you don't, all well and good. If you're interested in group coaching sessions as well to talk about menopause, I'm open to that too. But most importantly, let's keep on talking. Let's keep on sharing. Let's keep on learning. Thank you, everyone, for your time, for your patience. Thank you, Pastor Andrew and your congregation for allowing me this opportunity to share my time. And thank you, Pam, for facilitating everything.
No. Thank you, Ola. That's incredible. Incredible. Thank you so much. That was amazing. I'm very, very conscious of time. I think there was so much to cover there. I'm not surprised at all, actually, in the slightest that we've gone over time somewhat, but hoping that there'll be a little bit of time for any questions that people have popped in the chat. I don't know if you spotted them. I don't know if you could triple task there, Ola. I know you're amazing, but I don't know how amazing. There's a couple of questions in the chat. Ola, if you're happy to answer those.
Yeah, let's whistle through. Unfortunately, I'm not, you know, I have hands in many pies, but I'm not that great to do.
No. I can go through. There's a couple where there was one right at the top. There was somebody asking. Olivia was asking about the sort of relevance between menopausal and early dementia, really.
Yeah. So again, Olivia, you know, it's a really, really great question. The jury is out on that. There, fortunately, because of the rates of Alzheimer's and dementia that's happening, particularly in the West, more and more research is done on that. There have been research papers that have shown there could be a link, but the studies have been small and they also have been quite exclusive. It is a space to watch.
Thank you, Ola. I'm just wondering if I'm missing a question. There's Fiona's put a question. How do you help someone who is showing signs of menopause but don't acknowledge what they are going through?
Oh, do you know what? I've been there, done that. So, Fiona, I definitely know that. First and foremost, and this also applies to our men and boys. Okay, don't mention the word menopause. I know that is contrary to everything we're saying here. It's still quite stigmatized. And because we are still struggling to deal with going through that whole thing, don't mention the word menopause. but you might, you know, focus on what they're dealing with. So if they complain of joint pain, if they complain of irritability or fog, focus on that. How can you support somebody who might be saying, oh, I feel, you know, a bit forgetful, or I feel like, you know, I'm struggling with weight gain. You know, how can you help them feel a little bit more in control, a little bit more, reminding them that they're still themselves, they're still you, that we're all just getting a little bit older. But the I know it's easy to go into the quick fix of, oh, have you tried, you know, jogging? Have you tried walking? Have you tried this? At this stage, they're not ready for that. They're really not. All they really need is support. So I know this sounds like a wishy-washy answer, Fiona, but if you find somebody who is struggling with the menopause, just gently, just be supportive, be their friends, give them space to talk about how they're feeling. And then, you know, when they are ready, and, you know, ask them, you know, oh, you know, or even share your own experience, Fiona, if you are going through that. You might try leaving books around, or, you know, things like that.
Sending links to this webinar, maybe recording.
Yeah, but I also want to say that be mindful, if they're not ready to acknowledge menopause, they won't take that kindly. You know, when I was told, I'm going to quickly share a story. An ex-boyfriend of mine sent me a link to perimenopause website because he thought that I was perimenopausal when I didn't think I was. And I was livid. I was so livid that he thought I was old. But when I took a moment and read it, I realized I was. So be prepared to be knocked back if you are sending links and stuff. But in the main, just be supportive, give her space to talk about how she's feeling, and then, you know, look for ways in to make some suggestions.
Brilliant, thank you. Also, I was just going to mention, we were talking here about taking control of our lives, aren't we? And you and I are absolutely incredibly passionate about empowering people, particularly women, and taking back control of our lives, really. And as we're aging, obviously, this is the topic we're talking about, whether that's menopause. We slightly talked about end of life as well. And I just wanted to pop into the chat, actually. We have a fantastic organisation here in Sheffield called Compassionate Sheffield. They have a festival every year that I've been involved in, and I'm singing from the rooftops about, called Life, Death and Loss Festival, and it's absolutely incredible. I'm going to put the details of that into the chat because it's all free, and quite a few of those things are online as well, really. I think it's all part of the same thing about empowering ourselves with information.
Yeah, actually, just very quickly, when I talk about emotions, the one thing I forgot to mention was loss. So for many of us going through menopause, the loss of our fertility, even if we chose not to have children, is something that can be quite difficult to bear because we've lost control of that decision. So for some, you know, for some people, menopause is a stage of loss of youth, loss of fertility, a feeling sometimes of loss of who we are and who we thought we would be at this stage of life.
Yeah, Sanyu Ola's popped in the chat a question about what are the best supplements for menopause. Again,
I'm really sorry about sounding wishy-washy this, because I don't want to push people to things that still are not kind of proven, and I say proven in quotes by Western academic research, but I'll tell you the ones that definitely, as we age, you know, do. Magnesium is pretty good, and there are 2 types of magnesium, by the way. So do some research on this. But magnesium is really good for helping us sleep, helping our muscles, helping our bones. Vitamin D, particularly those of us in the West, we need vitamin D, not just for menopause, but generally. And in fact, you know, as you are postmenopausal, most doctors will prescribe vitamin D. One that I didn't realize was really important was vitamin B12. So vitamin B is important, but B12, I read a piece of research recently that said if you find you are graying very, very quickly, you might get your doctor to check your vitamin B12. And in fact, that happened to me, and I am on high dose of folic acid at the moment because my vitamin B12 levels were so low. I didn't realize I was also anemic. But that was because my GP did a blood test. So the first thing before you start taking random supplements is to find out if you actually need them. Because I know people take calcium, omega-3. Okay, omega-3, the good fats, whether you take them as a supplement, you take them in your oily fish. So there are a range of supplements we need as we age, and they can help us through menopause. But the first thing I would say is, as you start to feel achy or start to feel some of the symptoms and changes, have a chat with your GP, and they can probably do a blood test to see which ones that you are low on. Yeah.
Thank you, Ola. Thank you. I'm very conscious we've run out of time even. We've had 78 people today, actually, which is absolutely incredible.
Yeah. I will say this, you know, I did ask Pastor Andrew to send me some questions that people have asked, and I appreciate that I might not have covered all of them there, but I am also happy to send my thoughts on some of the questions. So if there are questions in the chat that haven't been answered, I'm happy to send Pastor Andrew the responses to them, and I'm sure he can share them along with my slides with everybody here today, if that would help.
It would. I think we can have an extra 10 minutes to wrap it up properly.
Okay, let's do that.
Way. Yay, thank you. I know also, Pastor Andrew, you mentioned Ola. If you want to mention, you've got a session coming up for men potentially in June.
Oh yeah, so Pastor Andrew and I were having a chat yesterday via WhatsApp, and he mentioned the thing about relationships, and you know, that you just need to just lead me down that path and I'm all there. And so I said, could we not have a session, Q&A for men? And thankfully, you know, Pastor Andrew, being the open-minded person he is, said absolutely yes. So we have now, you know, putting that in. So watch this space for that Q&A.
Fabulous, fabulous. Love it. Information is power, isn't it? And all of that. Yeah. Right. Has anybody else got any more questions, actually, while we've got 5-10 minutes? If we need another 5-10 minutes, I can see the sun shining on you, Ola. Sun shining.
Yeah, it's beautiful. It's beautiful here. You know, I'm sure it can't mirror anything that's happening in Uganda or anything like that, but we're getting close.
It is. I was just going to add that, you know, when I look back at my time, when I went through what I went through, I then, as I say, I've not shut up about it, but I've talked to.
Pam, can I
just please do.
There is a question in here. I'm not sure who asked this. It says, "Do us men also experience the same symptoms?" Now, okay, so there is a controversy that men go through something called the andropause, the male menopause. Now, in the past, this was called the midlife crisis. Now, you know, I've looked into this, and I want to say two things. I know there's a smile on my face with this, but there is actually a condition that some men experience where their testosterone decreases very rapidly. And it is actually a condition, and it is, I think it is called andropause. I know, I've forgotten the name for it. That is different to menopause. Menopause happens in women and those assigned female at birth. What happens with men is you know, it's I guess it's slightly different, but you do have a similar, your body ages, so it does decrease testosterone. So men do find that they lose testosterone, and some of them will see a slight increase in estrogen. So some men might see that they develop they might develop small boobs, you know, and they'll see fat around their stomach as well. So it's not male menopause. We're not going to say that, but there is definitely an aging thing happening with men where their hormones are also changing around as well. In fact, I know somebody who is writing a book about his experience of aging, because he documented for 1 year how his body, mind, and spirit was changing because of going through this. So it's not exactly the same, but as we age, there are certain things that are quite common.
Lovely, thank you. I was just generally saying that the more information we can get over to girls, to younger women, to everybody, and not just wait until we're nearly 50 to start and try and learn and get information and go to the library. I mean, there's masses and masses of information out there, isn't there, really? There was a couple of fantastic documentaries done by the BBC years ago that are still out there, with Davina McCall and all sorts of other things, masses of books in the library. Nice, Ola, that you've mentioned specific books to do with women of colour, really, because that was a massive gap, wasn't it, before?
Also to say that there are, in schools in the UK now, in their PSHE studies, menopause is now on the agenda. So it is something they're doing in schools. There are more and more women and girls groups talking about menstruation to post-menopause now, because while we're talking about menopause, what we really need to start talking about is our health across the lifespan. We need to be talking about what happens when somebody starts having periods. We need to be talking more about maternity, infertility. We need to be talking more about menopause and what happens afterwards. We need these conversations to be more less sensational, less special. They need to be as special as we're talking about if somebody has the flu or a cold. Yeah. Until that happens, people will still be stigmatized, stereotyped, put into boxes regarding this.
Very true, very true. One probably last question at the bottom there, Ola. What do you say about heavy prolonged bleeding?
Okay, so this happened to me actually. So I had in the last 12 months of my period. So the last 12 months of perimenopause for some individuals can be really, really scary, because it's like everything might all happen at once. So for me, I had a period that lasted nearly a month, and I had very, very light periods before that. It was heavy, it was nearly a month. So what I did was, if you notice your period is heavy and lasting longer than it normally is, go speak to your GP or speak to your pharmacist, because what they will do is they will more than likely, if there's no other reasons why this is happening, they will give you progesterone to stop your bleeding, because they know it's your body preparing for menopause. But please speak to your healthcare professional, because there may be another reason why you're bleeding. It may not necessarily be a period. So if you don't speak to your healthcare professional, they won't be able to do the test to make sure that it is just a period. Finally, if you bleed postmenopausally, so if you've not had a period for 12 months and you see bleeding, I implore you, speak to your healthcare professional. There's no reason why you should be bleeding postmenopausal. So if you are bleeding postmenopausal, it's nothing to be scared of, but they need to check that there's nothing to worry about.
Brilliant, good advice. Thank you, Ola. I think the final question is, Edith has put in the chat, I know someone who went into menopause in her mid-30s before she had children. Is it reversible?
No. So I actually met somebody who was menopausal at 15. She had a condition. It's not reversible, but it's manageable. So what they will do is when they go into menopause before the age of 40, and when they're still considered to be fertile, if they are fertile, they will give you menopause replacement therapy or hormone replacement therapy to shore up your hormones. So they will try and stop your estrogen, your progesterone from getting to the levels where you don't have it anymore. So what hormone replacement therapy does is to balance up the good hormone to the old, to the not so, the estrogen 1 to the estrogen 2, the protective hormone. So your friend who's in her 20s will be automatically given hormone replacement therapy to keep the protective estrogen in her body enough so that she can, if she wants to have children, be fertile, but also more importantly, so she's not at risk of cardiovascular diseases. While it's not reversible, it's manageable. They can postpone it as much as they can, and they'll probably keep an eye on her. And if they're not keeping an eye on her, she needs to make sure that she advocates for herself to say, can you keep on testing? Because they can test the levels of the estrogen in her body.
Fabulous. Thank you so much. Thank you, Ola. I think we are completely and utterly run out of time now. I think there's a question probably for Pastor Andrew or Paul. Was it Paul, the IT person in the background? Just will the slides be shared? I think, Ola, you said you were happy for your slides to be shared. It's just a matter of Pastor Andrew. I assume everybody who's signed up via Eventbrite could probably get a copy of the slides, maybe the recording as well.
Yes, the recording is going to go as soon as we finish. I think Paul will upload it to YouTube, and it should be available. And Ola, I think, is very comfortable to share the slides.
Wonderful, wonderful. As I say, we've had about 76 people, or 78, I think, at one point today. Thank you, Ola, for all of your expertise, knowledge, charisma, humor, all of that. Thank you for putting it in simple terms and in plain English that everybody can understand it. That was really, really fantastic. Appreciate that. Thank you, Pastor Andrew, for putting this together, and all of your team. Paul behind the scenes ran absolutely smoothly, and thank you for all the time and effort you've gone to put this on. Thank you for everybody who came along today, all 78 people on your Easter weekend on a Saturday lunchtime. It's not always easy to take time out, but it's been fantastic that so many people have on this important subject. And please spread the word. I would say, speak to everybody. I talk to people at bus stops, honestly. Now I won't shut up about it. So the information is power.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, everyone. Let's keep on talking. Let's challenge, let's talk, let's share, let's keep on going. Thank you so much, Pastor Andrew, and thank you, Paul, as well. And thank you, Pam.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Do you have colleagues in London who do this, Ola?
So I also do stuff in London. Yes, I do have.
All right, okay.
Yes, you do.
Because I've just been looking for the other pastor, but I can't find him, Pastor Schutz. I don't know if he's on. He's the one.
So I'm London. I'm like you. I moved to Sheffield, so I do have a large congregation and colleagues in London. So I do stuff.
Okay.
But also, I'm happy to do this anywhere in the world. So if you're from Uganda and you want me to come and talk to them in Uganda or Nigeria or wherever, I'm happy to spread the word wherever.
Fabulous. Yes, I've never been. Take me along. Wonderful.
Yeah,
Thank
you very much, everyone. Thank you very much, Pam. Thank you very much, Ola. And to me, like I said, the background I come from, the church background, this is really, really very important. And I think it's something I hope us understand the congregation, the people we lead, the people we pray with. One thing I found very, very fascinating, coming from a tropical country, some of the symptoms you said, I really think you'd be treated for malaria if you said what you said, like someone back home in Uganda said, oh, probably that's malaria, yet it's not. So very interesting.
It's usually because it combines. The way I see it is if you've got hot flushes, you've got irritability, you've got brain fog, maybe you've got a bit. Usually it's the aches and pains that in tropical countries that come through the most. People complain of backache or my joints. Then you look at their age and then you can say, I think you might be perimenopausal.
Yeah, very good, very informative. So thank you very, very much. And that's me done. Thank you very much and have a blessed day. Goodbye to you all.
You too. Goodbye to you. And we'll be in touch again, Pastor Andrew, soon.
Certainly. Thank you.
Okay, take care. Bye-bye.
All right, bye-bye.
Bye, everybody. Go out and enjoy that sunshine.
Absolutely.
Bye.
Bye,
God
everybody.
bless you. Bless you. Bye. Bye.
Bye, everybody.